Thank you. The next item of business is the debate on motion 17399 in the name of Gillian Martin on Scotland's hydrogen future. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate. Please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 12 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Colleagues, it's an important debate on Scotland's hydrogen future that we're having today, and I'm pleased to open it. Hydrogen stands as a critical pillar of Scotland's route to net zero by 2045, but also, alongside the development of offshore wind capacity, is one of Scotland's greatest industrial opportunities since the discovery of oil and gas in the North Sea. And today, I will set out some of the progress that we have made to further develop the sector, the challenges that we still face and need to overcome, and why collaboration across governments, sectors, borders is going to continue to be absolutely essential if we're to realise our hydrogen ambitions for Scotland and indeed the whole of the UK. Scotland is obviously committed, as I've said many times, to our target of reaching net zero by 2045. And this ambitious target reflects our determination to lead by example within the UK and Europe in our response to the climate emergency, but critically also to harness the vast economic opportunities that an energy transition presents for Scotland. Now, the global shocks that we've experienced since 2022, geopolitical instability, energy market disruption caused by Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and the urgent drive towards energy security in Europe have only underscored the need to work together in Scotland and across the United Kingdom, and indeed with our international partners, particularly in continental Europe, to bolster our energy security. A just transition remains at the heart of our approach, and we are determined that no community, particularly those who have powered our economy for generations, will be left behind as we move away from the burning of fossil fuels towards a low-carbon energy system. And we're working to build a hydrogen economy in which the benefits of our energy transition are shared, of which harnesses the full potential of the skilled people, the envy of other neighbouring companies, that skilled workforce, our world-class industries, again, the envy of neighbouring countries, and the natural resources that Scotland is so lucky to have. And I would say that our hydrogen action plan offers a pathway also to decarbonise hard-to-abate sectors as well. It can also balance our power system, improve, as I said, our energy security, and at the same time secure high-quality jobs in our communities. Our Hydrogen Action Plan and Green Industrial Strategy dovetail together and set out clear actions that would establish a thriving hydrogen economy in Scotland. And despite those changing global conditions, we are firmly in delivery mode. We are not wavering from that ambition, and we've already made some significant progress. We've got a growing pipeline of over 100 hydrogen production projects in varying stages of development, the majority of which are green hydrogen production projects, and providing that confidence in future growth in the hydrogen economy in Scotland. And the UK Government's hydrogen allocation rounds, or HAR as they're called, are a vital mechanism for supporting low-carbon and renewable hydrogen production across the UK, and providing that revenue support to bridge the gap between clean hydrogen and fossil fuels. Now, the first HAR round, the Hydrogen Allocation Round 1, delivered funding to 2 early Scottish projects. That was Cromarty and Whiteley, and both these projects are targeting production in 2026. A further 8 Scottish projects shortlisted last month in the HAR2 funding round provide a significant boost to our progress on the production capacity. 6 Scottish projects have been boosted by capital funding awards by the UK Net Zero Hydrogen Funds rounds, and in addition to the UK Government support, the Scottish Government have invested £30 million in the hydrogen sector, including £7 million in grants via the Hydrogen Innovation Scheme to 31 projects across Scotland, and that's been driving advances in renewable hydrogen production, storage and distribution, and the innovation associated with that. A £3.1 million grant to Storegga Speyside Hydrogen Project in Moray, which is developing clean energy to help decarbonise the whisky industry, of which I'm immensely proud that our iconic whisky industry is really one of the first and front movers in adopting this technology, and I think we're really going to see that happening at pace. And then there's £6 million via the Just Transition Fund to Hydroglen, a green farming pilot in Aberdeenshire. Additionally, the world first-of-a-kind hydrogen for home heating trial, that's run by SGN, the H100 project in Fife, is soon to commence, and it's supported by £6.9 million in Scottish Government funding. That will be funding to support... I will do.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful to the member for taking the intervention. She began by talking about hydrogen's role in helping to decarbonise hard-to-abate sectors of the economy. Why is she now talking in positive terms about using it to decarbonise an easy-to-abate sector like home heating?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think what they're doing in H100 is they're proving the concept is we're going to have to look at multiple opportunities to decarbonise heating. Now, I look at some areas in Scotland which are actually going to be producing probably more green electricity than they possibly could even get onto a grid system. You know, like, for example, the Western Isles, like the Northern Isles as well, where we could actually, if SG100 is able to prove the concept in the houses that they are supplying hydrogen to in a safe way, they can prove that concept and then roll it out to other areas where we could be using green electricity to provide hydrogen. I don't see a problem in actually trialling that. It's been trialled by a company that are putting a tremendous amount of money into it to prove the concept. We are in a situation now where we need to look at all the alternatives that there are for decarbonising every aspect of our society and all the use of fossil fuels that we have at the moment.
Daniel Johnson.
I'm very grateful to Jim Martin for giving way, but I think Patrick Harvey is raising an important point. Just in that, because hydrogen is not a kind of uncontroversial choice, it's not as energy dense as gas, and therefore there are uses where I think there needs to be a judgment as to whether it is sensible. So I agree we need to trial it, but does she acknowledge that we need to make a very careful judgment as to whether it's actually a sensible alternative to natural gas, rather than just straightforward electrification, which is more direct and therefore more efficient above all else?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think what can sometimes be frustrating about this kind of debate is that they have people who are very keen on particular types of technologies. They think we need a myriad of technologies. If SGN are wanting to invest in this project and prove the concept, and we've given them a small amount of assistance in order to do that, there will be learnings, not just for Scotland, but for the whole of the UK and indeed for Europe. And I think that's no bad thing. If I can continue to talk about some of the other areas of work that we have given funding to. We had projects in Orkney, Dumfries, in Galloway, Perth and Kinross, where among 11 projects to be awarded a share of £3.4 million in terms of developing the hydrogen supply chain as well. So further Scottish and UK government investment alongside private capital and indeed private innovation, privately funded innovation, which we will see the fruits or otherwise of that innovation, will continue to drive the establishment of a thriving hydrogen sector. However, certainty and pace are also key to seizing the benefits of hydrogen. To maintain this momentum, we really need to see the UK government set out the clear timetable for the future hydrogen allocation rounds. There's lots of projects that want to bid in for that. And indeed to confirm how GB Energy and the National Wealth Fund will help boost hydrogen development across the whole of the country. And I'm grateful for the conversations that I'm having with the UK government on both those points. It's increasingly clear that realising Scotland's hydrogen potential and delivering a balanced decarbonised system will require a national hydrogen network, integrated storage infrastructure and indeed a national market for hydrogen and indeed a recognition of an international market for hydrogen as well. Although uncertainty does exist on how, where and when network and storage infrastructure will be supported. So that is one of the barriers that is hampering some private sector investment into green hydrogen production. But once built, a national hydrogen network is likely to deliver significant advantages for hydrogen producers located close by. The development of the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan by the NESO, the National Energy System Operator, will identify the optimal locations for future energy generation, storage and hydrogen infrastructure across the whole of Great Britain. This important work will be completed as soon as possible. Our natural resources in Scotland are not just vital to our own transition. They can and they will and they are contributing significantly to the UK and Europe's energy security and decarbonisation goals. And an important context that I alluded to slightly earlier for this debate is that Europe's largest manufacturing economy, Germany, is going through a massive energy shift from gas to hydrogen. And Germany is unable to produce the scale of hydrogen that they require domestically and will need to import hydrogen from near or further afield. And they're very, very interested in what's happening in Scotland and indeed our near neighbourhood, which we share that huge potential for that production of hydrogen and to play a significant role in helping our neighbours to decarbonise as well. And I'll take... Do I have time? Presiding Officer.
There's time in hand, Cabinet Secretary. Sarah Boyer.
I'll not make it too long, Cabinet Secretary. I very much understand the concept of exporting hydrogen, but you've got to build the infrastructure. And I noted a comment by Professor Jim Skee, who leads the Government's Just Transition Commission, that he didn't see where the evidence was about justifying where the export markets were going to be. So has that work and research now been done to look at the costs and the opportunities?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government produced their own hydrogen export plan, which looks into exactly that, but this is not something that Scotland can do alone. It needs to be working with the UK Government on this. We need to be looking at how we can partner with those who want to buy hydrogen that's produced in these isles to get it over there. Obviously, Germany are the biggest market for that at the moment. You'll have seen since the election of the new government, or the members of the last government, they have taken on a great deal of borrowing in order for infrastructure development. It's absolutely critical that the UK Government is in the room with the German Government right now, talking about how we can improve the infrastructure associated with that. But first of all, I think it's very important that we need to be very clear that domestically we need to be using our own hydrogen to decarbonise our own industry in particular. And I think if we're getting the signals that we have a market in Germany which will take on hydrogen as we produce more and more, then that will mean that we have that confidence for the smaller scale hydrogen to be used domestically in the meantime. I realise that I'm probably running over time. I mean, I've set out a lot of the things that we're doing, a lot of the challenges are well known. It's important for us not to delay on this. We need to, I think, speak with one voice, and I hope that we can speak, disagreements aside about where hydrogen is best used. I think hopefully we can all agree that there's the opportunity there for Scotland to really capitalise on the fact that we are going to be producing far more green electricity than we can get into a grid, even with the grid upgrades, and that this is a significant opportunity to show that Scotland is a world leader in hydrogen production, but also to work with other nations in solutions for decarbonising the industry as well. And I think that that's what we are being consistent from my benches, and hopefully we can be consistent as a Parliament in driving forward that ambition. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Could I ask you to move your motion? Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. I now call on Graham Simpson to speak to and to move Amendment 17399.1. Around 8 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I welcome this debate because amid all the hoo-ha about net zero, just transition or affordable transition, whatever you want to call it, if you ask most people if they'd like to be able to use a fuel that gives off nothing but water to power their homes and vehicles, they would say yes. And that, in essence, is what hydrogen can deliver. And here in Scotland, we can be at the forefront of developing the technology to do just that. It's a great opportunity, as the Cabinet Secretary said. But as ever, we need to get on with it, because as ever, we're not doing well enough. Let me give you a very small example of that. For all the Cabinet Secretary's warm words, it remains true that a £100 million hydrogen action plan was announced in 2022, but when the Cabinet Secretary went to the Net Zero Committee on January 14th, she couldn't say how much of that had been spent. Now, having said that, I don't want this debate to be a point-scoring exercise, as that committee session was in parts, because I think we all want pretty much the same thing. And that's why we support the government's motion, and why the amendment in my name, which I now move, Presiding Officer, is so relentlessly positive, as you would expect from me, and that's why everyone should support it and the motion. And the government has done some good stuff, and we must recognise that. There was the £7 million in-year funding for grants to support strategically important green hydrogen projects. 4 applications for that were submitted in December. There was another £7 million for the Hydrogen Innovation Scheme, which supported 31 projects. Now, in January, Ms Martin could not say what that achieved, so I was hoping that today might be the day, and it almost was. She gave us a little bit of detail in her speech. There was £6 million from the Just Transition Fund to HydroGlen, which is the green hydrogen farming pilot. Another £15 million has gone to the Green Hydrogen Hub in Aberdeen, with some of that going to Storegga Green Hydrogen Project in Speyside, which is working to decarbonise whisky distilling, but is also working with the local authority to potentially provide green hydrogen for fleets of vehicles. That's really good. So all that is well and good, but the story so far is one of the country having great potential, but of not quite getting over the line yet. Absolutely.
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm really grateful for Graham Simpson listing all of those, because actually, cumulatively, it comes up to quite a lot of projects. I think that because I took so many interventions, I maybe didn't quite land the point that we're working with Scottish Enterprise in delivering even more funding to 11 projects that's awarded a share of £3.4 million as well. So we can add that to this list.
Graham Simpson.
Thanks. I wasn't actually here to do the Cabinet Secretary's job for her, but I am happy to assist on this occasion. There are promising projects, and I'm grateful to Green Cat Hydrogen for letting us know about the Crecca Hydrogen Facility next to Chapel Cross, the Bin Eco Park project, the Strathallan facility, which could be operational by 2027, and the Hammers Hill development in Orkney. Now, I mentioned at the start how hydrogen could be used in heating. That would help us to decarbonise and increase our energy security if we make the hydrogen here. And the H100 project in Fife, already mentioned, should tell us a great deal about how feasible that rollout would be. I think there's time available.
There's time in hand, Mr Simpson.
Jolly good. I'll take Mr Harvey.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful. The member talks about energy security. In what way does it assist energy security to power home heating with something so massively inefficient as hydrogen compared with the extremely high level of efficiency that comes from direct electrification? That will undermine the country's energy security rather than helping it.
Graham Simpson.
Well, I'm mystified by the Greens' approach to hydrogen, a fuel that gives off nothing but water. I would have thought the Greens would be on board with that. And surely, by having a pilot project, the idea is to test the technology to see if it works. And Mr Harvey's shaking his head as though he doesn't want a pilot project. It is indeed a bizarre position. It should be possible to use hydrogen in existing infrastructure and boilers, and if there are signals to the market to this effect, it could be a game changer. This kind of solution would be appealing to... Yes, I'll take another intervention.
Tanya Johnson.
And again, as I said before, I think it is important to pilot this, but hydrogen has about the energy density of 1/4 that of natural gas. And is it not better to focus on direct powering of domestic heating through the electricity rather than trying to substitute it with hydrogen, because it is so much less energy dense?
Graham Simpson.
Well, I think I actually agree again with the Cabinet Secretary that our energy system should be a mix, and that's why I'm keen to pilot hydrogen and just to see if it works. And I see Mr Johnson nodding with that point, so I'm glad about that. But let's see how it goes. If it doesn't work, then we shouldn't proceed with it. But if it does, it has potential. Now, I have to say it is a little bit concerning that the Scottish Government does not include low-emission heating systems such as hydrogen-ready boilers in its Scottish House Condition Survey data. In response to a written question, Alistair Allen said that, quotes, "These forms of heating will be considered for inclusion in future surveys when they become more prevalent in the Scottish dwelling stock." I would just say gently to Dr Allen that actually I think we need to know the state of play now, not sometime in the future. So he might want to reconsider that. If I can now turn to transport, the biggest carbon-emitting sector, but also the one with the most potential for using hydrogen, in my view. There's a lot going on in transport. In November last year, the cross-party group on aviation heard from Jane Golding of Sustainable Aviation Test Environment, who spoke about delivering sustainable regional aviation and improved connectivity for the Highlands and Islands. She told us that Hightrans are looking at a number of projects, including a 9 to 19-seater inter-island aircraft powered by hydrogen, which they hope to be ready for 2027. The aviation sector in general is looking at hydrogen as a future fuel. Now, those MSPs who follow my contributions will no doubt have picked up on my keen interest in EU Regulation 2023-1804 on the deployment of alternative fuels infrastructure. Now, I see no nods of recognition, so if I refresh the Chamber's collective memory, and this will be of interest to all those members who are desperately keen to keep pace with EU regulations, this particular one says that by the end of this year, there should be one recharging pool at least every 37 miles on the main road network in the EU. Imagine if we had that here. It would be transformative. Mr Golden, to my left, might be happier to have an electric car than he is, and refuseniks like me might consider getting one. And on hydrogen, the regulation says publicly accessible hydrogen refuelling stations must be deployed with a maximum distance of 124 miles in between them. That's why across the EU you're seeing hydrogen filling stations popping up. Now, I note from your look, Presiding Officer, you may want me to conclude despite having a little bit of extra time. So if I can just finish by mentioning Grangemouth in my region. We've known about the potential to make lots of hydrogen there since well before Project Willow. It is for the UK and Scottish governments to turn warm words into action and make it happen. But generally, I think there really ought to be consensus on this issue. Happy to support the motion in Gillian Martin's name, and I hope she'll support my amendment.
Thank you, Mr Simpson. I now call on Sarah Boyack to speak to and move Amendment 17399.3. Around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think we need a constructive debate today because this is going to be something that affects us right across the country. It's important in terms of our environmental and economic ambitions, and it's about ensuring that we can develop the opportunities now to deliver jobs and a sustainable and greener future tomorrow. And it means action now. And as even just in the first two speeches, the amount of research and technology development that's happening, it's an ongoing issue. So I think I proposed an amendment which I'll move now as an add amendment. I didn't do a delete all and insert. I think it's important that we work constructively together, but I really wanted to emphasise the need for joined-up thinking, not just about the production of hydrogen, but about how we use that, because I think that's absolutely critical from talking to different sectors. I think the UK Government's recent announcement of 27 new hydrogen-powered projects across the UK under HAR2 should be celebrated, as 30% of those projects are in Scotland, and projects like Cromarty and Whiteley will produce green hydrogen, which is going to be used by local industry, transport and distilleries. So we know this can be made to work. And Scottish Labour is in full support of the expansion of green hydrogen projects in Scotland, as it's the most sustainable ongoing opportunity in terms of hydrogen projects. But we do need a clear strategy which links hydrogen to the green industrial strategy and the long-awaited energy strategy. So that's why I've proposed an amendment to call on the Scottish Government. Is that? Oh, briefly.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful. I note and I welcome the fact that the member is specifically referencing green hydrogen. I was a little confused by the amendment from Labour, which talks about low carbon opportunities. I wonder if Sarah Boyack would clarify whether she agrees that neither government should be giving any support to hydrogen production from fossil fuels.
Sarah Boyack.
There's a hierarchy here, isn't there? There's maximising the opportunity of the lowest carbon opportunities in terms of hydrogen. I know there's an argument for blue hydrogen. I was going to reflect on this at the end. Most of my focus is going to be on green hydrogen. Blue hydrogen potentially has a place, but it's CO2 emitting, so you need to have carbon capture and storage, and you need to pull that all together. So it is about going for the most effective low-carbon opportunities, I think, and that's where I'm going to focus on. And I think the strategy we need is to think about how we use the green hydrogen that we're going to be producing in Scotland. The reference has been made to transport. We can potentially use it for different types of transport. Buses already using it. There's opportunities in terms of rail and HGV, but it needs a joined-up approach because you need to think through which are the sectors that you can work with, what are the private companies. We need to get the regulations right. Huge numbers of opportunities. And as I flagged in the debate, in the statement on Grangemouth yesterday, sustainable aviation fuel needs to be part of the mix as well. And if you look at what's happening in Grangemouth at the moment, we should think about the implementation of the Project Willow report, which highlights the need for action and investment now and links to the opportunities where you could use green hydrogen and think about the link through to sustainable aviation fuel, which again takes you back to transport, thinking through the different types of transport, where different types of fuels are most appropriate as we get the change over the next couple of decades. So the RWE project, for example, at Grangemouth is really important. And we need to make sure that Project Willow and the work done by the Just Transition Commission in their report 2 years ago is all acted upon, because it's not waiting till something bad happened, it's about planning ahead. And that is the key thing for me at Grangemouth. We need to make sure that it's... Can I just keep going on this? It's not just about increasing the supply of green hydrogen. We need the demand and market to supply it to as well. And that's about encouraging industry growth in the private sector, as well as thinking about how public investment can be critical to unlock the opportunities we've got and link together with our key renewable energy sources in Scotland. So I'm very keen to see our governments working together. I noted the positive comments in the Cabinet Secretary's speech, because we need a clear approach to new on and offshore wind to make sure that the electricity we're going to generate, that we're going to need across our homes, our transport, our economy, actually is going to be used where we need it. And we're already seeing pumped hydro storage and battery storage developing. So factoring in how we supply electricity to deliver green hydrogen is key. And if you think about it, last year, constraint payments to wind farm operators reached £380 million to curtail 4.3 terawatt-hours of wind energy. That is bonkers. So that's why I'm articulating the need for a joined-up approach. And hydrogen production could use that extra electricity, lead to overall lower network costs, help to bring down people's bills, businesses' bills. But we also need to make sure we have the grid capacity where it's needed to supply that electricity. So where you've got sites that are going to be developed for green hydrogen, we need to make sure it's got the electricity supply. So Grangemouth, the discussions we've had earlier in the debate today about where we can do it. But we also need to do that for our industrial and our transport sectors as well. I've mentioned buses, transport, rail, HGV. where are the locations across the country where the best opportunities are sitting? So I think the Scottish Government needs to do some work about thinking strategically about locations. And we need to think about then how we prioritise what the opportunities are. As we look to the future, it's clear that green hydrogen will be a cornerstone of Scotland's renewable energy strategy. It just needs to be joined up. And I think we've had a long history of project commitments, but not always seeing the delivery. So if we're going to meet our climate targets, support new jobs, get economic development across the country, we need a strategy that maximises the use of our natural resources, but also develops industrial sites which could deliver on those opportunities. And by investing in this cutting-edge technology, we can drive innovation, foster economic growth, and protect our planet for future generations. So it's something we all need to work together across the Chamber, but also see our governments working together, and not just our UK and Scottish governments. Bring local government in here, think about planning, think about the supply chains, the transport, connectivity. So I hope colleagues will support our amendment this afternoon. It's aimed at being constructive and ensuring we have a joined-up approach to production, supply and use of hydrogen where it makes most sense, because it potentially ticks our climate boxes, creating new jobs and supporting our economy. So I hope it will give confidence to new investors that there's a degree of support across the Chamber. It's not going to be 100%, that would be impossible in here, but there's at least a positive support for making sure that we maximise the opportunities in Scotland and we get on with it. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Boyack. I now call Patrick Harvey to speak to and to move Amendment 17399.2. Around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I do welcome the fact that we've brought this, the opportunity to debate this issue. It shouldn't be seen as a simplistic debate, though. It certainly shouldn't split down between unequivocal hydrogen enthusiasts and hydrogen sceptics. The issue is much more complicated than that. The role that hydrogen could play in Scotland's energy system and in several industries could be very significant. It could become a significant part of our economy too if we produce large amounts for export. I would disagree with anyone who suggests that that can't happen. But it's not a magic solution for some of the challenging aspects of the transition to sustainability. And I would equally disagree with anyone who wants to see hydrogen in the same category as carbon capture and storage, direct air capture of greenhouse gases, or foolhardy experiments to dim the sun. There are, sadly, some in our society, and too many current and former politicians, as we've seen this week, who want to abandon real climate action in favour of implausible techno-fixes. We can't afford for the real potential that hydrogen does have to be seen in the same way. And we can't afford the same simplistic, unrealistic thinking to affect the way that we develop the hydrogen sector. I think Sarah Boyack was quite right to say that there are two critical questions: how we produce hydrogen and how we use it. And the answers to both questions will determine the value that it has for our society and for the transition to sustainability. So first, where does it come from? Well, the internationally recognised colour code for hydrogen has about as many shades on it as the pride flag. But fundamentally, most industrially produced hydrogen to date has been made using fossil fuels with no abatement of the emissions. Now, whether that's the most polluting fuels like lignite, as some countries use to produce hydrogen, or others like fossil gas, we need to be very clear that this approach has no role to play in a transition to sustainability. And it should not only be denied government investment, it should simply not be permitted. Then there are those who advocate for blue hydrogen, still produced using fossil fuels, but this time with the addition of long-promised carbon capture and storage technology. Now, even if CCS can ever be made to work at high enough capture rates to result in negligible overall emissions, and there's still plenty of doubt about that question, even if that can happen, it will always be a huge additional cost, making the production of blue hydrogen dramatically less efficient. So if hydrogen is to play any meaningful role, it must be produced using renewable electricity, green hydrogen. I'll give way.
Brian Whittle. Thank you much. Thank you much for Patrick Harvey for giving way. And I find myself in the uncomfortable position of actually agreeing with some of what Patrick Harvey has to say today. But in terms, I'm very much an advocate for green hydrogen. But in terms of blue hydrogen, you can also produce blue hydrogen from waste. I think you know that sort of reusing of that waste to deliver blue hydrogen should be considered as potentially an alternative.
Patrick Harvey.
If I understand the argument correctly, it still depends on the development and efficiency of carbon capture and storage, and that has yet to be proven and will always add additional cost. Now, I moved on to talk about green hydrogen, and of course this is where Scotland has a massive advantage. The potential scale of renewable generation from Scotland is immense, and if we develop that potential fully, we'll be producing far more electricity than we need or can export through transmission infrastructure, and that means that the production of hydrogen is an obvious opportunity. But where hydrogen comes from is not the end of the story. We also need to address how it's used. And there are still those who cling to the idea that we can simply inject hydrogen into existing energy systems, whether that's the gas grid for heating, or transport systems to displace fossil fuels. And there are some fundamental limits here that we need to address. We can use renewable electricity, generate it, and then use it to produce hydrogen. The hydrogen can then be stored, transported to where it's needed, and turned back into useful energy. And at every step in that journey, efficiency is lost. So we end up with less useful energy at the end of the process than was generated at the start. So for any use case where direct electrification can be achieved, this will always be the better choice than hydrogen, not just with today's technology, but under the laws of physics themselves. And that argument is all the stronger when it comes to heat, because the technology that some countries have been deploying for decades already at scale, and with which Scotland is struggling to catch up, go far beyond even the theoretical limit of 100% efficiency that a closed system can reach. Heat pumps don't turn electricity into heat. They use electricity to gather heat from the ambient environment, and they can produce up to 3 or 4 times as much heat output from the electrical input that they run on. Hydrogen can never do this. Yet the Scottish Government continues to promote the notion of hydrogen for domestic heating. As recently as February, in a speech about climate action, do I have some time in hand?
I can give you the time back, Mr Harvey. Daniel Johnson.
I very much agree. I think Patrick Harvey is setting out why I think we need to look carefully at this. And if he's right about the point of production is about physics, there's a point around consumption actually also about chemistry, in that a hydrogen is just one small atom as compared to natural gas, which is a 1 to 2 chain carbon molecule. The energy density is just different. It's a different gas. Would he agree with that point?
Patrick Harvey.
Absolutely. And the size of the molecule, or compared to the atom, is another factor in the infrastructure, because leakage would be really, really significant if we don't replace some of the infrastructure. As recently as February, as I was about to say, the First Minister made a speech describing hydrogen heating as a shining example of how Scotland is leading the way in finding solutions to tackle climate change. And he said it was a clear signal of the path that we must take. This is absurd. And even most of those in the gas industry who've been pushing this nonsense have started giving up on it. The idea that it's a trial, that it's a proof of concept, the question isn't whether hydrogen for heating would work. Of course it would work, just as flushing your toilet with sparkling mineral water would work. It'll just never be a sensible thing to do. I give way at this time.
Briefly, Minister.
Does he acknowledge that there are...
Could you address the microphone, Minister?
I beg your pardon, Presiding Officer. Does the member acknowledge that, notwithstanding everything he's said about the benefits and preferability of electrification, that there may be parts of the country where electrification may be difficult to achieve, and therefore other solutions such as this should at least be experimented on?
Patrick Harvey.
Well, I'll address that in my closing comments, Presiding Officer, because this is why, in presenting their advice on the 7th carbon budget to the UK Government, the UK Committee on Climate Change wrote that hydrogen, and I'm quoting now, has an important role within the electricity supply sector as a long-term storable energy that can be dispatched when needed, and as a feedstock for synthetic fuels. However, we see no role for hydrogen in buildings heating, and only a very niche, if any, role in surface transport. I urge the Scottish Government to listen to the UK CCC, its own advisers, its own source of expert advice on climate action, understand and accept that position and ensure that our approach to the development of hydrogen is about using the most efficient use of what could be an important part of our energy system and our economy. And I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Mr Harvey. I now call on Willie Rennie again, around 6 minutes. Mr Rennie.
It was a joy to hear Graham Simpson. A joy to see his cheery disposition, the new man born next to Maurice Golden, who has new lunch mates on an occasional basis, which I'm sure Graham Simpson would benefit from as well. Maybe that's why he's so cheery this afternoon. And I think we do need cheeriness on a Thursday afternoon when we're debating hydrogen, because I think it's important that we do focus on the upsides of hydrogen, because there are many upsides. And it's not just about the upsides and debating the principles, and there's many have got strong views in this debate, but it's actually about making it happen. Because too often in this Parliament we pontificate about principles, but actually plans for delivery tend to be rather dull. But they're actually incredibly important if we're going to achieve our objectives. And it is supremely logical, especially following Sarah Boyack's remarks in her contribution, about the incredibly expensive constraint payments that we are using on a regular basis in order to cope with the supply and demand of electricity. And if hydrogen can play an important role in trying to minimise those constraint payments, that will be a good thing. Because we also know that batteries themselves, and there's much use of and talk about batteries. In fact, there's many more planning applications from batteries than I thought there would be, but they store energy for a short period and perhaps not sufficient to be able to cope with the wide fluctuations over a longer period of time. Pump storage also plays an important role in that storage capacity, and there's new facilities being developed. But hydrogen could play an important role in the storage of energy over longer periods of time, including what I discovered was salt caverns, which sounds a wonderful place, perhaps not just for eastern Russia, but perhaps for Scotland as well, where we could be storing them for the longer term. But there's also, I think, an urgent priority for the use of hydrogen in terms of green steel and moving away for fertiliser and chemical production from the grey use of hydrogen, or the grey hydrogen, for the generation of that. Because we will continue to need chemicals, we will continue to need fertilisers in certain cases, and I want them to be as green as we can possibly make them. So green hydrogen would play an important role in decarbonising steel production and chemical production as well. So the opportunities for hydrogen are really quite positive, and that's why Graham Simpson was so positive this afternoon. But I just want to put a note of caution. I wonder whether the targets that we're setting on this are just a little bit wild. Because if you look at what the global use of hydrogen just now is at, 1.4 gigawatts in 2023. For Scotland alone, by 2045, it's 25 gigawatts just for Scotland. Now, if you look at the Green Cat, who've provided this really valuable contribution to the debate, they say their 4 projects are 80 megawatts. Minuscule compared to that 25 gigawatts. Now, I know it's only 4 projects, but then if you look at Scotland, that's, if we get all the projects through, that's 28 gigawatts. Not all the projects are going to go through, but 28 gigawatts. So 25 of that will be used in hydrogen. So I'm just wondering, because it's important, I'm all for big, ambitious targets, but we need to have a plan that works, because this means skills planning and investment. It's not cheap, and it will require a lot of people to make this happen. So my question, I suppose, to the Cabinet Secretary is just how realistic is this target? And Green Cat were very diplomatic in their briefing, but I think they've imposed a note of caution on the extent of this as well. But they're also rightly pointing out that demand generation is incredibly important as well. We need to make sure that it's domestic rather than exporting, because we need to have a reliable demand on this use. Because we know this is going to be difficult, because change is hard. For people who've done things certain ways for a long time, change is difficult. It requires a lot of investment, skills, training. It makes sure, because inertia, you know, if it's already working, why bother to change it? That's often the view of many. So we need to make sure that we've got the demand generated locally with the practical measures to make this work. Now, St Andrews University in my constituency are doing a project together with Strathclyde University on the green hydrogen accelerator. And it's very positive, £13 million, led by Professor John Irvine, who's got a long track record in this area. And the purpose of that is to be a world-leading research facility to drive up efficiency, because we shouldn't just think that where we are just now is where we need to be. We need to be incredibly efficient, and they're looking at energy storage and chemicals, the prime areas for the use of hydrogen. Now, my final note, because I notice I'm coming to the end of my time, is public acceptance. I've got a lot of complaints from people who are concerned about battery storage facilities in their neighbourhood, about solar farms. We know that nuclear power stations were not popular. We know that wind turbines are not popular with certain sections of the population. There is no energy source that's universally popular. We know that. Hydrogen is going to fit into that too. So we need to be ahead of the game on this and provide the assurance and the confidence to people, because if we're going to get to that 25 gigawatts, that's going to be hydrogen facilities in many parts of Scotland. So let's get ahead of this and build confidence that these facilities are safe in your neighbourhood, because if it's not, we've got no chance of getting to that 25 gigawatts. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to the open debate. I call first Kevin Stewart, to be followed by Brian Whittle, around 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I believe that hydrogen offers an extraordinary opportunity for Scotland, an opportunity that promises not only to transform our energy landscape, but also to secure our economic prosperity for generations to come. And as a Parliament, we should be fully committed to helping the Scottish hydrogen sector develop and grow, including integrating it into a wider European and international network. Scotland has a vast capacity for renewable energy production, which gives our nation the potential to become a world leader in renewable hydrogen production and to be able to export at scale. Not only does Scotland have in abundance all the raw ingredients necessary to produce low-cost clean hydrogen, we are also well placed in terms of the workforce and industrial base. Scotland's reputation for excellence in energy, our extensive oil and gas supply chain, as well as our strong onshore and offshore wind sectors, will be the key to our achieving a just transition to a low-carbon and then a net-zero age, with hydrogen at the very heart of that transition. Hydrogen will play a significant part in the decarbonisation of our energy system by being a key component in an integrated energy system. And the first key area is that of green energy storage. This is because hydrogen is an ideal partner for wind, because when there is too much wind, that energy can be stored as hydrogen, and when there's not enough wind, that hydrogen can be turned back into clean green energy. And given this partnership, hydrogen has the potential to be the large-scale and long-term energy store to replace or augment the critical balancing and resilience services that natural gas provides our energy system today. Therefore, the growth of renewables and the hydrogen economy are complementary. And we need a strong renewable sector to support the development of a range of green hydrogen projects. And that's why I'm glad to see the Scottish Government's ambition for hydrogen production is very closely aligned with its ambition for expanding capacity of both offshore and onshore wind. In terms of actually storing hydrogen, it can of course be stored as a compressed gas or as a liquid, just like natural gas, but there's also the potential for storing hydrogen underground, including in depleted natural gas fields. Scotland, with its expertise in oil and gas, should be at the forefront of hydrogen geological storage, as well as carbon capture and storage. And we also need to explore the recent discovery of natural hydrogen reserves, where hydrogen produced underground has been trapped in reserves much like natural gas. And while this is still in its infancy, we should be exploring if Scotland has hydrogen reserves, and certainly the Skulls base in the North East is ready to be called into action, I would say, at home or abroad, if this discovery bears fruit. Now, I've touched upon carbon capture, Presiding Officer, and I don't think we could have this debate today without mentioning Grangemouth, because research has shown that Grangemouth refinery could have a future in hydrogen production. Both the UK and the Scottish governments have invested in the Project Willow study, which identified hydrogen production as one of the key pathways for the cluster's future. Project Willow confirmed that hydrogen production at Grangemouth would be significantly more commercially viable if the Acorn carbon capture project had Track 2 status. Now, we have seen Ed Miliband's announce huge deals south of the border for carbon capture in England, with announcements in recent times. It is now time for Scotland's share here. It is time that Ed Miliband and the UK Labour government confirmed that Track 2 status for Acorn, because if Scotland is to realise its vast green energy potential, the UK government must urgently ensure that the resources are put in to Acorn so that we can move forward with our ambitions. We have waited far too long. It is now time for those resources to come to Scotland, and that will help in terms of boosting Grangemouth's potential future. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you. I now call Brian Whittle to be followed by Audrey Nicholl. Up to 6 minutes. Mr. Whittle.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to be able to speak in this debate, because, as many of you know, I do extol the virtues of green hydrogen. Listening to the debate so far, I think my concern is that too many of the renewable eggs are being put into the electricity basket. But the reality of moving every aspect of our lives that currently powered by fossil fuels to an electric alternative is that the resources required either don't exist or can't be extracted in a way that is economically or environmentally viable. Studies project that by 2030, the UK is expected to require up to 40% of the current global lithium production and 29% of the current global graphite production. We would actually have to increase our copper mining by 300%, or cobalt mining by a staggering 8,000%. So, are we really going to support the increased strip mining of cadmium in Canada, or cobalt in East Africa, or even the coal-powered extraction of lithium in China, so we can import these rare metals just so we can be smug and self-righteous? That approach does little for climate change. Hydrogen has an important role to play in our future energy mix, That's a point I think all in the Chamber broadly agree on. The question of how big that role remains to be seen and will in no small part be determined by the choices the Scottish Government makes in the coming months and years. I think our approach to decarbonising the country has too often been focused on what can achieve the quickest win, or the strategies where they are over-ambitious and unrealistic but generate good headlines leading to an inevitable ditching of targets. The reality is for Scotland that priority should not be how quickly we can decarbonise, but how we use the opportunity to sustainably decarbonise, demonstrating to the world what can be achieved to the benefit of our economy. We are in danger of picking winners too soon before all that research is done. Heat pumps, important as they are to the jigsaw, no doubt about that, but they're not the silver bullet that I think Patrick Harvie has tried to make us believe I'll give way.
Sarah Burt.
Yeah, I think there's an issue. It's not just about being ahead of the game, but there's also learning from other countries. And if you go around lots of European countries, they've got heat networks supplied by electricity. So it's not just about inventing the new tech, it's also learning from other countries and making it work where it's going to work in our communities.
Brian Whittle.
I appreciate that intervention. I'm actually, believe it or not, going to come on to what other countries are doing. I think, to move on, I think the UK Government's taking decisions which could lead to the gas grid being wound down before we know for sure what its potential is to the hydrogen economy is a problem. The gas grid right now could take up to 10 or 20% green hydrogen blended right now if we had the will. Given that home heating is such a big part of our emissions, why are we not making that change very soon? We should be encouraging innovation in all aspects of renewables, especially in green hydrogen, given Scotland's natural resources of wind and water are exactly what the production of green hydrogen requires. We have a chicken and egg situation here, Presiding Officer, of supply and demand. Hydrogen companies want to grow and invest significantly, but hesitate to do so without a clear demand from off-takers. Potential hydrogen users want to convert to a greener fuel source, but hesitate to make that investment without confidence that the supply of hydrogen will be there for them. All the while, demand for hydrogen globally continues to rise. The German federal government estimates that the total hydrogen demand will be up to 130 terawatts by 2030, with approximately 70% having to be imported. A joint statement on the inter-industry cooperation between Danish producers and suppliers of green hydrogen and the Dutch industrial offtake market said today that 1.3 million tonnes per year of the Dutch offtake of hydrogen is the second largest in Europe and is expected to increase significantly towards 4.5 million tonnes per year by 2050. The International Energy Agency states that Belgium is positioning itself as an import and transit hub for hydrogen, with this domestic demand estimated as much as 6 terawatts of renewable hydrogen or its derivatives in 2030, potentially rising to 165 terawatts by 2050. Now, in 1924, the United States of America exported $1.8 billion of hydrogen. So despite President Trump stating that the USA would drill, hydrogen is still in the top 15% of exports exported to Japan and Vietnam and South Korea and Belgium and Mexico and Denmark and even Saudi Arabia, for goodness sake. So what are we waiting for? Do they know something that we don't? We are already behind the curve. Why are so many other countries benefiting from hydrogen production? It's increasingly being recognised that while decarbonising our economy and society remains a crucial long-term objective, the approach we have taken to meet that goal risks coming is too great and the cost for it too small of a gain. Ultimately, Scotland or even the UK reaching net zero will not be the turning point in reducing global emissions. With that in mind, I believe our approach should focus less on when we reach net zero, but more on how we reach it. The shift to decarbonise the world has enormous economic potential if Scotland is in a position to make the most of its knowledge and natural resources. When it comes to net zero, we not only need to consider how we decarbonise, but crucially, how we benefit economically from the decarbonisation of the world. Presiding Officer, I realise I'm running out of time, unless I have a little bit extra.
We've exhausted most of the time we have in hand. I can give you the time back for the intervention, though.
Okay. Hydrogen represents one such opportunity to capitalise. Demand globally for hydrogen is growing rapidly as an alternative to natural gas and, in some cases, an alternative to electrification. Scotland has a well-developed renewable electricity sector needed to create hydrogen and significant expertise of working with gas both offshore and onshore, and crucially it has the generating capacity, as nearly £1 billion paid to generators and constraint payments show. Imagine rather than paying to switch off the generation, we were able to use that electricity to generate hydrogen for use elsewhere. Not only do we eliminate constraint payments and lower bills, we build a new industry, creating jobs and tax revenues that benefit the whole country. Presiding Officer, we either continue to tinker around the edges of hydrogen production, only to adopt and import technology as the rest of the world develops and adopts these fast-developing technologies, as we did with wind and solar, or we buck the Scottish Government trend, be bold and encourage the development of these technologies so we can lead the world in decarbonisation to the benefit of the Scottish economy. That, Presiding Officer, is a goal worth shooting for. Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Before calling the next speaker, just to confirm what time we had in hand has now just about been exhausted. So interventions will need to be accommodated in the time allocation. I call Audrey Nicholl to be followed by Faisal Chowdhury. Up to 6 minutes, Ms Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What an interesting week to have a debate on Scotland's hydrogen future. A week that began with Portugal and Spain experiencing a major disruption caused by a failure of the power system and underlining the fragility of the way that we live our lives. A week that saw crude oil refining cease at Grangemouth, and a week that saw the Climate Change Committee report that the UK Government has yet to change its approach effectively to tackle climate risks. So this is not where we want to be. The window to keep global warming within 1.5 degrees limit is closing, and if we ever needed any more evidence that the world is running short of time to avert catastrophic climate change, this was it. However, today is about acknowledging and even celebrating the progress being made in Scotland's hydrogen industry and looking ahead to the future. So in my case, less higher chemistry and maybe a bit more higher economics. Scotland has ambitious climate goals. I've always believed that setting rigorous targets shows that we're prepared to take strong action delivered through the just transition. Targets focus minds, they remind us that we must always do more, and importantly, they make us innovate. Now, Scotland is a treasure trove of innovators in the energy space, including companies and investors now applying years of experience in the oil and gas industry to support the wind, carbon capture and storage and hydrogen markets. And as the motion outlines, hydrogen is one of Scotland's greatest industrial opportunities since oil and gas. We have the energy history, the skills and experience to be a driving force in the hydrogen sector in Europe and beyond. And as we continue the transition to net zero, green hydrogen will play an increasingly important role, particularly within industry as organisations decarbonise their operations. Underpinning the development of a hydrogen economy in Scotland is, of course, the Scottish Government's Hydrogen Action Plan, a commitment of £100 million in capital funding for renewable hydrogen projects and enterprise agencies supporting businesses access new opportunities. The Scottish Government Hydrogen Export Plan recognises the opportunities arising from countries looking to those that can provide hydrogen at scale. And Scotland, as we've heard, is well placed to service future export markets for hydrogen, presenting us with a significant industrial opportunity. Now, not to disappoint, of course, Aberdeen continues on its journey as a hydrogen city and has a strong track record as an area of innovation, working across European and domestic governments to develop the working technology relating to hydrogen vehicles. And in addition, the Aberdeen Hydrogen Hub, a collaborative between Aberdeen City Council and BP, and supported by Scottish Government funding of £15 million, is making very good progress. And I think that pulls in the point that Sarah Boyack made about this being an issue right across government. Yes, indeed.
Cabinet Secretary.
I have been reminded, as I'm listening to Audrey Nicholl, is obviously the success of Aberdeen City in providing hydrogen for various vehicles. Is she aware of the fact that in other cities, Aberdeen has has made it more attractive for other cities as well. Inverness could be the next one going forward in this, with actually their collaboration with Storegga in producing hydrogen and potentially having their vehicles for the local authority powered by hydrogen.
Audrey.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that intervention. Yes, I am aware of that, and I think that does go to show that although developments in Aberdeen have not been without some challenges, that has been a lead, has led the way across Scotland, and that's to be commended. So the flagship hydrogen campus within the energy transition zone in my constituency is set to become home to a new green hydrogen test and demonstration facility, which is a multi-million-pound collaboration between Energy Transition Zone Limited and TUV Sud that will help drive forward use of industrial green hydrogen and deliver the energy transition. And this week's Scottish Renewables Supply Chain Impact Statement reflects the progress being made in green hydrogen, including the European Marine Energy Centre in Orkney, pioneering developments in green hydrogen, and a highlight in the form of the Ardbicke distillery becoming the world's first distillery powered by green hydrogen. And I note the comments from members this afternoon on transport, and at least one business in my constituency is seeking to transition across to manufacturing hydrogen pressure vehicles for the renewables sector. But key to this is funding a cost-efficient and safe option. And of course, Scotland has two governments in the energy space, and many of the levers required to develop Scotland's hydrogen economy sit with the UK government. And one of these is the regulatory framework, without which progress is restricted. So I would ask the Cabinet Secretary for an update on progress developing the necessary regulations to further develop hydrogen infrastructure, power and storage. So, Presiding Officer, this leads me to my final point. Project Willow, which has already been mentioned, has identified hydrogen production as one of the key pathways for the cluster, however made more commercially viable if the Acorn Carbon Capture project has Track 2 status. So I join business leaders, the government, colleagues and stakeholders in calling on Scottish Labour to put its shoulder to the wheel and demand the UK government provide urgent clarity on the project today.
Thank you very much. I now call Faisal Chowdhury to be followed by Claire Adamson. Up to 6 minutes, Mr Chowdhury.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Hydrogen is a key part of our journey to net zero. While we can decarbonise many parts of our economy through electrification or renewables, hydrogen is necessary in the area where that isn't viable. This is a sector with immense potential. Hydrogen technologies have been estimated by the Hydrogen Energy Association to be worth $700 billion globally by 2050 and deliver hundreds of thousands of jobs in Scotland alone. Given the existing knowledges we have from our energy sector, this is something we should be pursuing. And I'm glad there is agreement across parties and government on that. The shortlisting of 8 Scottish sites in the second hydrogen allocation round should be welcomed, particularly Selmsmuir Hydrogen in Livingston, which could deliver 6 tonnes of hydrogen a day and fuel the Lothian bus fleet. This would be complemented by the Grangemouth Hydrogen and a pipeline to ports in Leith, which could enable exports to other countries, building a cluster of hydrogen knowledge in the Central Belt. But if we want to be successful, we must build up capacity quickly. But as we have seen in other areas, the planning system is sluggish and insufficient in bringing new energy infrastructure forward. We have heard from the Planning Improvement Service that understanding amongst planners and decision makers on hydrogen is limited and can vary between areas. I welcome the Scottish Government establishing the planning hub to improve this. But what we need to see is knowledge embedded into all parts of the system and local development plans, and a clear pipeline of those projects so decision makers can have clarity. And as with all planning, ensuring we have enough planners working to actually make this decision. Additionally, public engagement is key. Some industry figures report public unease regarding hydrogen proposals, much as has been said about community input in energy infrastructure. And when many people hear hydrogen, they think Hindenburg. So ensuring there is understanding of the safety of this system should be a priority. I'll come back to skills. With our expertise in oil and gas, Scotland is well placed to enable the hydrogen economy. These sectors have the transferable technical skills such as engineering and project management. Others in safety, risk and regulatory compliance, creating a clear pathway between oil and gas and hydrogen should be on the cards to ensure workers can adopt and guarantee them a just transition. However, Climate Exchange found skills transfer from industry alone will not be sufficient in the long term to meet the Hydrogen Action Plan. This is a great opportunity to boost apprenticeship and deliver opportunities for young people across all areas of the country. That brings me on to my last point on infrastructure. Hydrogen is a versatile element. It can be transported by liquid or gas form, by pipeline or boat. Infrastructure to ensure hydrogen can flow cheaply and easily from where it is produced should be delivered at the same time as investment in green generation. So we don't find ourselves playing catch-up in the areas to come. Presiding Officer, I again welcome the shortlisting of 8 Scottish sites in the latest hydrogen allocation round. They are a reflection of the talent that, and appeal of Scotland in this sector. But we cannot just hope to be a world leader in green hydrogen. The Scottish Government should tackle the planning and skills issue I have outlined and develop a clear strategy which ensures green hydrogen can be used in as many areas of our economy as possible and hit our net zero target. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Claire Adamson to be followed by Maurice Golden. Up to 6 minutes. Ms Adamson. Thank
you very much, Presiding Officer. Today's debate reminds me quite often of a recurring problem we seem to have in Scotland. And I've seen it across a number of different areas, but specifically in the area of science. We do not talk up the incredible scientific developments taking place here enough. We're all familiar with the country's rich scientific engineering legacy. Prodigious Scots who at the height of the Industrial Revolution practically invented the modern world. But what about these more modern developments? What about genuinely world-leading research in life sciences, burgeoning renewables industry, our tech sector, our games ecosystem? I recall a meeting of the cross-party group in science and technology that I chaired, and it focused on groundbreaking work in Scotland on quantum tech and semiconductors. Quantum semiconductors, plutonics and wireless all have a role to play in healthcare, net zero, communications, financial services, space, you name it. We need to celebrate this work that's going on in Scotland more, and we need to recognise just how much research and development and delivery is taking place here. My colleague Kenny Gibson hosted an event last month for the Critical Technologies Supercluster, and these subsectors included photonics, quantum semiconductors, wireless and sensing technologies, but also it included hydrogen. We don't hear enough about this work, When researching for this debate, the same problem is apparent for hydrogen. I confess I wasn't aware of the scale of the Scottish hydrogen projects. The Scottish Government has implemented funding schemes to kick-start green hydrogen projects across the whole country, and these projects will be an integral part of the energy mix in the transition to a more sustainable society. Our hydrogen economy is growing and growing rapidly. The Scottish electrolytic hydrogen production market is estimated at 126 terawatt-hours. Scotland is one of Europe's largest offshore renewable energy zones, and this makes us ideally placed for large-scale hydrogen projects, inward investment, and gives us the tools required to become a major green hydrogen exporter. And we heard about the money involved in that earlier in the debate. So this critical demand for hydrogen looks set to grow. And let's be clear, it's not only green energy market, it's part of the mix. We also need to be working across different sectors and different types of sustainable energy generation, and hydrogen will become a more important player. The need for this transition is existential reality for us in Scotland, because the climate crisis is an existential threat. It is depressing that I feel the need to reiterate that point, but anti-scientific sentiment is rife. Bad faith actors are intent on obscuring the reality of the climate breakdown because many perceive it as a threat to the profit margins of their political interests. But the fact remains that we need to shift to sustainable energy sources. The natural disasters we have become used to seeing in the news cycle are not natural in the true sense. They are the result of accelerated climate breakdown caused by human activity. The science is clear on this, and addressing this climate crisis is both an economic and environmental necessity. Our European allies are pivoting away from their resilience on Russian gas, and this is in response to Putin's barbaric invasion of Ukraine and the threat to energy security. But it's also a reflection on the need to move to sustainable energy sources, an environmental imperative, but an economic strategy too. I first became aware of the interest in hydrogen in my first term in this Parliament when I hosted an SGN Networks event, where they were then talking about the possibility of using hydrogen in the domestic setting in Scotland. And we have now seen, with the Government's investment of £32 million into the Fife hydrogen hub for H100 Fife, that the first homes to be powered by hydrogen were opened by the First Minister in February of this year. And while I appreciate that there are concerns raised about this, I do think we have to explore these opportunities, and a proof of concept is always the first stage in working out how we might be able to roll this out around the country. That has gone from being a concept, 2011, to 2025 delivered and people using this technology in their homes. The Scottish Government has also funded 2 North Sea Alliance Scottish-German bilateral hydrogen research projects to investigate pipeline infrastructure between Scotland and Germany. I believe that this is a crucial part of what is going to be the future of energy security and energy delivery in Scotland, and I welcome everything that the Scottish Government is doing to support this industry and to create proof-of-concept projects that will put us on the starting stage of being able to roll out hydrogen across many, many different areas in industry and in our domestic homes. And I look forward to seeing this developing over the coming years and it contributing to the economy of Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Maurice Golden to be followed by Emma Harper. Up to 6 minutes, Mr Gold.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Graham Simpson opened his speech on a positive note, and where he leads, I shall follow. Because I do welcome the ambition being shown by the Scottish Government on hydrogen. They are absolutely right that Scotland should be leading in this space. So it's also right that significant resources are being committed, and we've heard about some of these already today, such as the multi-million-pound investment in strategic green hydrogen projects, support for the Aberdeen green hydrogen hub and the investment in a green hydrogen farming pilot. All of these are welcome. Why? Because hydrogen, especially sustainable green hydrogen, offers another useful tool in our efforts to decarbonise our economy and reach net zero. But this isn't just about climate, it's about seizing a significant economic opportunity. The Scottish Government's own Hydrogen Action Plan aims for 5 gigawatts of production by 2030, which would amount to half the targeted UK production. By 2045, the target for Scottish production is 25 gigawatts. And there is potential for Scotland to be exporting 2.5 million tonnes of green hydrogen by that date. That could be exported across Europe, given the estimate that the EU will import around half of its hydrogen by the end of the decade. That's a huge market waiting for a reliable supplier, given the uncertainty over energy supplies in the wake of the invasion of Ukraine, and a role Scotland is well able to fulfil. In fact, Scotland could supply as much as a third of Germany's demand, so it's encouraging to see the UK has signed a hydrogen partnership agreement with Germany to collaborate on research, standards and trade. Behind such trade would lie new supply chains, new inward investment and, most importantly perhaps, new jobs. This is exactly what a just transition is supposed to mean, especially for those of my constituents in the North East who have built their careers on oil and gas and who now need long-term opportunities to use their skills in a net zero economy. Happy to give way.
I think that the member's done an excellent job of setting out the scale of the opportunity and indeed highlighting the 5 gigawatt target rising to 25 gigawatt. But that's just in 2030, the 5 gigawatt. As I understand it, we're not producing any green hydrogen at industrial scale. Does the member believe that we're making sufficient progress in order to realise those targets and those opportunities he sets out?
Maurice Golden.
No, I don't. And I think that while green hydrogen is something I think we would all agree with, actually what we're seeing is more realistic, is often grey or even blue. And ultimately that is an issue. And I think we need to make progress because the case for hydrogen is, in my view, inextricably linked with being green. And the business case, the case for net zero, ultimately changes significantly if we're talking about different ways of producing said hydrogen. However, and another note of caution that, with the hydrogen story, we've also been there on green jobs. Promises are made and then broken. It's the same story we see repeated across the entire net zero and low carbon portfolio. Emissions targets are repeatedly missed, recycling is stalled and net zero policies are watered down or abandoned. So whilst government ambition and investment is welcome, we do need to be concerned when the Scottish Government can't say what's actually happening with their Hydrogen Action Plan or how the investments are ultimately going to deliver a green hydrogen future. And it's delivery that counts. One place where that's happening is at the H100 project in Fife, the first of its kind to use clean power to provide hydrogen for domestic heating. I was able to visit it recently along with colleagues and see their progress for myself ahead of the start of renewable hydrogen being delivered into hundreds of homes later this year. And I can confirm the pancakes that were made using the hydrogen hob taste exactly the same as with natural gas. But as an aside, on transport, I note Graham Simpson's comments on the EU mandating hydrogen refilling stations every 124 miles, not to mention EV stations every 37 miles. As an EV driver who is frequently frustrated by access to chargers, I can only hope the Scottish Government learns from such issues when and if it's developing future hydrogen infrastructure for transport. But back to heating. I think it's important that we have a robust mixture, and that undoubtedly includes heat pumps, but we have to acknowledge that heat pumps aren't suitable for everyone. Scottish Government estimates suggest around 24% of properties won't be suitable by 2040, even with upgrades. Hydrogen, utilising existing grid infrastructure, is theoretically possible, but certainly isn't the first port of call. The most likely scenario is that hydrogen is used in domestic properties, either as part of a blend or for those in the proximity of industrial clusters. Deputy Presiding Officer, let me close with a simple appeal to the Scottish Government. I don't doubt their intentions. There is much more in this motion to agree with, but we need to see them provide the detail and ultimately help deliver a green hydrogen future.
Thank you. And we now come to the final speaker in the open debate, Emma Harper. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Marrying up hydrogen production with the clean renewable Scotland has an overwhelming abundance of is not just the right thing to do when aiming for net zero in our quest for a just transition. It's about managing our natural resources smarter, cleaner and giving a better for Scotland and a better place for Scotland and our people. And it's about making sure the economic dividends of the hydrogen industry are put to good use right here in this country. The UK has spent decades wasting finite natural resources and putting our energy eggs in one basket with the dash for gas of the 1990s. And marrying renewables generation with producing hydrogen will provide load balancing across the grid, just as pumped storage hydro does for peak demand, but across a much longer period of time. Using surplus electricity generation to produce and store hydrogen allows for the reconversion of that stored hydrogen back into the electricity grid and back into the grid. The technology is there and has been for decades, but it's only now that the political and organisational will has been brought forward to make this a key priority for Scotland's energy future. This can't just involve government. We need business and industry to work collaboratively with the state to drive things forward as well. That's why last year alone, £7 million of funding was on the table for businesses as seed money for green hydrogen projects across the country. In my South Scotland region in particular, schemes like the Chapel Cross Initiative in Annan are repurposing the facilities of the 20th century nuclear power plant and putting in place the technology of the 21st century. It's great to hear colleagues mention Green Cat Hydrogen at Creeka near Annan. Actually, it's really positive here that in this chamber that the South Scotland is getting mentioned at all. Just 6 weeks ago, Green Cat Hydrogen announced plans for a green hydrogen facility at the new energy transition zone at Chapel Cross near Creeka. And if the plan gets going ahead, if it gets the go-ahead, 150 jobs will be created during the construction, and another 50 long-term high-skilled jobs would be in place once the plant is complete. 50 long-term high-skilled jobs is large, and it's a really important number for our rural region. Schemes like this wouldn't even make it on the drawing board without support of the Scottish Government and the South of Scotland enterprise. This is just one example of how hydrogen and the government's backing of it is reaping economic dividends for Dumfries and Galloway, for South Scotland and beyond in the rest of Scotland. Anyone who knows the history of renewables on these islands and further afield knows the opportunities the UK missed time after time when it came to wind generation. Meanwhile, the small, independent country of Denmark was leading the way, and today the Danes remain world leaders in wind tech and, more importantly, in the high-skilled, high-value jobs it has brought to that part of the world. If Scotland gets in early, and that is exactly what the Scottish Government plan for hydrogen aims to do, we can be for the hydrogen industry what Denmark has been for the wind for decades. We could be a world leader, an exporter of technology, industrial plants, expertise, all of it boosting our industrial sectors and boosting our economy. Presiding Officer, Scotland has seen over 5 decades of the dead hand of Westminster frittering away our energy future. And we can't allow the new energy technologies of the 21st century to suffer the same fate. Our green industrial strategy should harness the full benefits of our natural bounty to the betterment of our economy and ultimately the betterment of the people in Scotland. One item I just want to highlight is the carbon capture and storage of carbon removers at Crofthead Farm near Crocketford, just off the A75. They are making inroads into carbon capture and sequestering of biogenic carbon. And the Cabinet Secretary and the First Minister have both visited to see for themselves the potential of what carbon removers can achieve. And that's another fantastic project that's based right in the southwest of Scotland. Carbon sequestration of carbon dioxide for the whisky industry is part of what they're doing. And carbon removers, they were crucial during the pandemic for providing dry ice for vaccine storage and transfer during the pandemic. So that's another project that really is worth us shouting from the treetops about when it comes to getting Dumfries and Galloway on the map as part of the just transition as well. Because I am conscious that quite often we talk about the North East, and that's absolutely the right thing to do. But there are places in the south that are doing a great job as part of the just transition also. Just to wind up, Presiding Officer, hydrogen is a key strand of the strategy, and I'm delighted to have that we have the Scottish Government that is taking it seriously, rather than kowtowing to the interests of Whitehall and Westminster and the short-termism on display only this week from the former Prime Minister Tony Blair. So I hope ministers give his latest outburst every respect it deserves, and I hope colleagues will support the motion in Gillian Martin's name at decision time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Harper. We move to the wind-up speech in the first call. Mark Ruskell, up to 6 minutes. Mr Ruskell.
Deputy Presiding Officer, and I very much welcome this debate here this afternoon. I would characterise much of it as being the laws of physics versus magic solutions, and I certainly thank Daniel Johnson and Patrick Harvey for reminding us of some of the laws of physics and chemistry in relation to hydrogen and what some of its advantages are as an energy vector, but also what some of its limitations are. And I think we need to we need to start this debate by understanding the facts of what hydrogen can and can't do. The Cabinet Secretary spoke early on about how the government's focus is on the hard-to-abate sectors, And as Greens, we very much do see a role, particularly for green hydrogen, in those hard-to-abate sectors. Fertiliser production, heavy shipping, aviation, cement production, steel potentially as well. And Willie Rennie talked about the need for us to build up that domestic demand in Scotland. But as Sarah Boyack pointed out, that can only really come through an industrial strategy and through just transition planning at the cement factory at Dunbar, at Grangemouth, at Mossmorran. We need to start with what the role is of hydrogen within our domestic industrial sector and then build up supply chains and understanding around that. But then, the Cabinet Secretary then, moved quite quickly on to talking about the role of hydrogen in easy-to-abate sectors. And I think that's the bit where we disagree as Greens with the government here, because it makes no sense to be investing in hydrogen in uncompetitive uses, such as domestic heating, such as the use of trains, hydrogen use of trains and buses in our cities. These are grossly inefficient uses of hydrogen. And the Cabinet Secretary talked about the 100 pilot projects that the government has invested in around Scotland. A number of SNP members have spoken about those in their constituencies as well. But I would ask about how many of these pilot projects are actually focused on those hard-to-abate sectors, or how many of them are experimenting with easy-to-abate uses of hydrogen, where we already know the answers. So, H100 in Leven has been mentioned as a domestic application of hydrogen for heating and the need to prove the concept of that. We have already proven the concept of hydrogen heating many, many times over. There have been 54 independent studies that have been done globally that have picked up on hydrogen heating projects, and they have all reported, and not a single one of those studies across Europe, across the whole world, have recommended the widespread use of hydrogen heating as a result. And that's partly because each one of those studies have shown an increase in energy costs as a result of hydrogen heating. On average, Cabinet Secretary, those are showing an 86% increase in costs for householders. So I want to make some progress. So, when Graham Simpson talks about how people out there just want a wonderful heating system where, the only thing that's produced is water at the end of the day, well, yes, absolutely fine. But that can't come at the expense of fuel poverty. And if Mr Simpson is genuinely wanting, pensioners and hard-working families to pay astronomically high energy bills because of a hydrogen heating solution, then I think that's wrong. I think that's driving people into fuel poverty. And that's exactly why the UK Climate Change Committee has recommended against the widespread adoption of hydrogen for home heating. I need my time, actually, with this one. I think with H100, actually, Brian Whittle and Maurice Golden really pointed to what the real driving interest is behind that particular home heating project. And it's quite clear that SGN manage a gas grid. They want to continue to put fossil fuel into that gas grid. They want to blend hydrogen in, but 80% of what will be flowing through that gas grid in future will be fossil fuel gas. It will make us more dependent on fossil fuel heating, not less dependent. And of course, we can't put carbon capture and storage on millions of domestic boilers in people's homes. So there is a danger that we'll be locking in emissions if we go down a route of blending hydrogen into the gas grid. Now, a number of members have spoken about the role of blue hydrogen. I'd like to make some progress. A number of members have spoken about the role of blue hydrogen as a transition in this mix. And I recognise Kevin Stewart's enthusiasm for CCS. And there's a part of me that really, really hopes that CCS is effective and does work and is efficient. But there are still major concerns about CCS and about whether it is deployable at scale. And it's not just Greens that are saying this. The UK Climate Change Committee, a number of years ago, advised the Scottish Government to develop a plan B in case Acorn doesn't actually match the expectations that I think Mr Stewart wants it to. So, it's not a dead cert that CCS is going to be available, it's going to be cost effective and it's going to work. A number of members have also spoken about applications of transport. And yes, absolutely, I see the use of hydrogen with heavy transport, with shipping, but not for lighter transport, not for coaches, buses, cars, HGVs. And, it was interesting to see, Graham Simpson and Maurice Golden getting very excited about the potential to have hydrogen charging points every 124 miles. That just filled me with range anxiety, to be honest, particularly when I can charge my EV car at home on 8 pence a kilowatt hour overnight. Why would we move towards a hydrogen transport system with so much range anxiety within that? So to conclude, Presiding Officer, I think there is a strong hydrogen economy in the offing in Scotland, but it has to be focused on those hard-to-abate sectors. That's where we should put the research. That's where we should put the just transition planning. That's where we should put the science and the effort from government and industry working together, not wasting time on applying hydrogen into areas which are going to be not cost-effective and going to end up driving up the bills of hard-pressed families around the country.
Thank you. And I call on Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think this has been an important debate. I like debates like this, where we talk about big topics, where actually there's some broad consensus, but there are things that we need to navigate. And I'd actually like to begin by reflecting what Claire Adamson said. I think we have to, rediscover that heritage of innovation in science. Ultimately, I am a believer that science can make our lives better. It has the answers to the challenges in front of us. And Scotland has an enormous legacy in that regard, and I think it has a huge future. Indeed, I think the Cabinet Secretary and indeed others, I would include Kevin Stewart and my colleague Sarah Boyack, set out actually a very compelling case about why we have such a big opportunity in front of us. It's a combination of the huge investment in renewables that we have got. The issue, I think, as Sarah Boyack pointed out, in terms of that, what do we do with the inevitable excess electricity that we'll be generating? The absurdity right now that we are paying providers to switch turbines off, which in turn is just increasing current electricity costs. And I think, Kevin Stewart, I think, absolutely rightly pointing out, one of our other incredibly important elements is that our ability to because of the history that we have with the North Sea, in terms of that geological knowledge, the ability to do engineering offshore, means that these come together to form an extraordinary opportunity, especially because this is going to be a very significant part of the world's energy economy. And indeed, I very much appreciate Maurice Golden really setting that out in contrast, or in the context of Germany's ambitions. And they have been very clear. I mean, they have huge targets around their hydrogen consumption of requiring between 95 to 130 terawatt-hours of hydrogen by 2030 alone, and that will double thereafter by 2045. So this isn't just about our energy economy, our energy security, but it's actually potentially about what we have to offer the world. And given that we are where we are, with our incredible geographic opportunities because of our offshore wind potential, and the fact that Germany and other parts of Europe are just across the North Sea, I think there is extraordinary potential. Very happy to give way.
I thank Mr Johnson for giving way. And I, in part of my speech, talked about that wider European and international network. Does Mr Johnson share my view that there should be discussions right across Europe at this moment around about that potential network, so that we get it right and we have energy security throughout Europe and less of a reliance on the likes of Russia?
Daniel Johnson.
I couldn't agree more. I think, and that's why the UK government has sought to establish agreements with Germany, but it's why the Chancellor just in the recent days was pointing out the importance of Europe as a trading partner. And look, above all else, I think Willie Rennie was right, is that we need to concentrate on making it happen. But I think that does require us to have a bit of a dose of realism, which is why I really very much value Patrick Harvey's contribution, because there are some fundamental physics here and some fundamental chemistry. And let me just point this out, that in order to make hydrogen possible, you need to store it at a compression of 700 times atmospheric pressure. You need to store it at 253 degrees below Celsius. Now, I think we absolutely can come up with the engineering and science solutions to deal with that, but it is non-trivial. And I think some of my concerns around this is that we simply think, well, we can stop using that kind of gas and start using this kind of gas. The reality is the energy density of hydrogen is considerably less than natural gas. That's the difference between the hydrogen atom and the natural gas, which is made up of ethane, methane and propane. Those are considerably more energy dense. That allows you to do different things. I do think we need to have our pilots. I think H100 I think is interesting for a number of reasons. I think that the end use is probably the least of it, because I think we do need to explore how we can repurpose our current gas networks for the purpose of hydrogen. And indeed, I think that was a point that was alluded to by the Cabinet Secretary. And I think projects and pilots like H100 are part of that. But I think what we do need to do is understand a couple of things. First of all, I think one sort of footnote in this, and again alluded to by William Rennie, this isn't just about energy. This is also, I think, about the other things that we currently use hydrocarbons for. And Grangemouth and Project Willow is substantially about this. But we will need hydrogen in order to produce dyes, pharmaceuticals, other sorts of things in combination with biorefining, and hydrogen is critical to that, and we actually really need to get into the detail of that. But ultimately, to make this happen, we need to recognise there are going to be options and decisions. This isn't just about let's race for hydrogen as much as possible. There are limitations to hydrogen, whether it's about energy density and the physical requirements. That's what limits its. I think I'm going to have to close very shortly, Mr. Whittle. Apologies. Or I can take an intervention according to the presiding officer.
Brian Whittle.
Okay, I speak as an industrial chemist by trade. The whole point of hydrogen is it's limitless, as opposed to hydrocarbons, which of course are not limitless. And I think I'm extraordinarily in this, my ambitions are much higher than the green ambitions over there, given that he wouldn't let me intervene and to discuss. But this hydrogen is limitless.
Daniel Johnson.
So I share that. I mean, the amazing possibility of hydrogen, of simply taking electricity and water, electrolysing, and I don't know if other members remember the demonstration that took place at the exhibition stand just a couple of years ago. I mean, it's almost like magic. But I would also say to Mr Whittle, as an industrial chemist, there are also physical limitations to what it can and can't do. So, as we pursue this, we are going to have to understand, well, what are the decision points? And at each one of those decision points, whatever we choose to do, there's going to be an option that we choose not to do. And actually, that needs to be crafted quite carefully, because we're going to have to move at such pace. And I would also just point out that we haven't always been good at delivering at that pace. The hydrogen strategy itself was delivered 3 years late. It is good, but I think it is also very broad and non-specific. So let's embrace hydrogen, but let's also be clear what it can and can't do, and let's make sure that we maximise our potential. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. And I call on Edward Mountain.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I'm delighted to be able to rise to speak in this debate on a motion which I broadly agree with. Not always happens when the government bring a motion. But before I talk about it in any great depth, I just would like to remind members of my register of interest, where I declare that I've got a farming interest, because I may talk about fertiliser, and I've got an interest in a fishery on the River Spey, which may be affected by a hydrogen plant. So I've made that clear at the outset. First of all, I would like to say that I also agree with the Labour motion, and I've been enthralled by the debate this afternoon by Daniel Johnson and Brian Whittle and one or two others quoting physics and chemistry, and I now remember why I didn't do those at school and did other subjects. And my only problem is I can support most of the Green motion till we get to the bit about heating, and then I sort of lose the thread and I cannot support it. And I think, frankly, it's rather disappointing and shows a lack of vision. Now, let's be clear, my knowledge of hydrogen has had to be brushed up quite clearly. What I do know from the experiences on the Net Zero Committee is that to produce hydrogen from electricity takes about 40 to 45% power loss to make it into hydrogen, and then to convert it back to electricity creates about another 10% of power loss. So there is a huge amount of power loss, which means that it is quite an expensive way of doing it. But I've also found out that it requires 9 litres of water to produce 1 litre of hydrogen. So again, it's quite a lot of that resource, and I'm going to come back to that resource in a minute. I will do it in a minute, yes, if I may, Mr Harvey. Just want to make a point. So the point is that to produce hydrogen, there are costs not only to the environment, but there are costs to the industry. And therefore, we need to send the industry clear signals about the need for hydrogen. And that doesn't require us to be downers on all the things that it could be used on. On that note, I'll give way to Mr Harvey.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful to the member. He expressed some scepticism about the Green position on heating, and then in the very next sentence went on to explain how much energy loss is involved in the production of hydrogen from electricity. Can he not accept then, as the UK Climate Change Committee have advised, that this is an extremely inefficient way to provide heat for people's homes and buildings compared with the already available forms of electric heating?
I think, Mr Harvey, it's good to listen to the argument as it develops rather than jumping in at the outset. And I have actually tried to explain to you, Mr Harvey, on numerous occasions why looking at different fuels is more important than just blandly going on an EPC certificate when it comes to insulating houses. You did not listen to me then. So hopefully you'll listen to me now, because what I want
Through
to
the
see...
chair, please, Mr Mountain.
Sorry, yes, Presiding Officer. What I would like to see is the UK government giving a very clear steer to the industry that hydrogen is going to be important. And therefore, if we said to the industry that a percentage of power that was going to be used had to come from hydrogen. It would encourage the industry to invest in it, and it would reduce the cost of hydrogen production, which means that we could see benefits and allow it to become at a certain level that it could be affordable in housing. Now, there are benefits from doing that, and I can't remember who it was, and I should have done, is somebody talked about constraint payments and the fact that we would get away. Sarah Boyack talked about constraint payments and that we wouldn't have to pay them. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice if we could use hydrogen or develop hydrogen so that we didn't have to pay people for not generating power and for having idle turbines? Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to have battery storage plants dumped all over the Highlands in an unthought-out way? And wouldn't it be nice if the Highlands didn't have to have pylon lines all over it if we could use underground pipelines? Because that underground pipeline, presiding officer, is there. What we've heard this afternoon is it's going to be redundant, and we've heard clear points from, I think it was Emma Harper and one or two others, regarding the gas pipeline and how it could be used and repurposed to transmit hydrogen. But we have to be careful when we're thinking about hydrogen, and I just sound a couple of words of warning. The siting of the hydrogen plants is absolutely important, and we can't denude our watercourses and lochs to produce that hydrogen. And we need to make sure that we harvest the water that we're going to use for that hydrogen production when there is a surplus of it, and there isn't going to be a surplus every summer if the temperatures stay up. And we also need to think carefully about the byproducts that come about from it. You know, what are we going to do with the oxygen that comes from the hydrogen plant? Is there a role? Is there a subsequent industry? I think there is. So I'm pleased on the debate this afternoon that we've heard from the Acting Cabinet Secretary, who's very open-minded and wants to see a market deployed. I'm pleased to hear from Graham Simpson that it's just water that's coming out of hydrogen that when we've used it, and it's got to be part of the mix. And I agree with you, Sarah Boyack, about the use of hydrogen for transport. Isn't it mad that we can transport hydrogen in a lorry, but that lorry can't be fuelled by hydrogen to take the hydrogen around with it? Something wrong with the regulations. I think we need to catch up with it. As I've said, I've given enough air to Mr Harvey. I don't think that he's on the right leg when it comes to domestic heating. And I agree with Mr Rennie. Well, you can make lots of noises that you want to, Mr Harvey. I tend not to do that when you're speaking. And I agree with Mr Rennie
Through
about
the chair, please, Mr Mountain.
Sorry. I agree with Mr Rennie about the storage of energy and hydrogen being a resource for that, and also the production of e-ammonia, which would be a useful fertiliser for farmers, because let's be honest, we don't produce fertiliser anywhere else in the United Kingdom. Now, Maurice Golden made the point of about a third of Germany's demand could come from what we've got in Scotland, and I could go on. I agree with most of the speakers. There's only one section I don't agree with, and I don't agree with the Greens. I don't agree that they have got it right. I think they are missing the point, and if they were slightly more open-minded, instead of just looking at preconceived ideas, there might well be a role for hydrogen in domestic heating, providing they didn't take a position which put industry off. And on that note, I will close my thing.
Thank you, Mr Mountain. I now call on Alistair Allen to wind up the debate. And if you could take us to 5 o'clock, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The tone of today's debate has been constructive, and indeed I think it was Willie Rennie who urged the tone of the debate to be cheery at one point this afternoon, and I think we more or less achieved that, although I may disappoint Mr Rennie by telling him that there are no salt caverns, unfortunately, in Scotland, thanks to the geology that we have. However, I think that is not so much, that's not pessimism, that's just data, but the point stands, and Willie Rennie is right. There is a great deal to be positive about in this debate, and a great deal of room for consensus in this debate about the hydrogen sector and how we need to help it develop and grow. As we've heard throughout today's debate, whether it was from the Cabinet Secretary, from Patrick Harvey, many other speakers, developing Scotland's hydrogen sector does present huge opportunities for Scotland. and as the United Kingdom's energy future and economic prosperity are important to all of us, I think there was common ground. There were differences of opinion, but there was common ground on some of these issues. There has been a surge in momentum and enthusiasm for hydrogen. I've been able to see that in my role as chair of the Scottish Hydrogen Industry Forum. The opportunities and technical challenges in hydrogen deployment are conveyed to me whenever I speak to companies who are active in this new sector. I just wanted to try and address one issue first of all before going on to anything else, because it did come up a fair bit in our discussions today, and that was about hydrogen and domestic heat. And I listened carefully to what the Greens had to say today. I think it's important, simply all I will try to do at this stage in the debate is to introduce a bit of perspective about all of this. The Scottish Government has supported the SGN Hydrogen for Heating project, which seeks to help understand the potential role of hydrogen in this area. But it's important we do that, and it's important that we do that mindful also of the fact that the fact that one of our asks of the UK Government is about the price of electricity, and that stems from our recognition that in most circumstances, many circumstances, the priority is the electrification of heating in houses around the country. So I hope there is not quite as much disagreement about some of these things as sometimes came across today. We want to support the scale-up of we'll give way.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful for the member giving way, and without wanting to rehash the disagreement that we've had, I wonder if I could ask if the Scottish Government is presented by the UK Climate Change Committee with the same advice that they've given to the UK Government, that hydrogen does not have a role for home heating and a limited or niche role for transport. If that same advice is presented to the Scottish Government, will they accept it?
Minister.
Well, I'm not going to preempt any decisions by the Scottish Government other than to say the member is right to point out that the same advice applies in both cases. But we want to support the scale-up of hydrogen projects, and we have taken steps to ensure that our planning and consenting regimes are responsive to the growing number of developments emerging across the country. We've taken action to improve capacity and capability in our planning system to enable local planning authorities to respond to the growing number of hydrogen developments across Scotland. And that was a point that was picked up today by Sarah Boyack, by Faisal Chowdhury and others. We have sought to address that in collaboration with Edinburgh University, University of Strathclyde and Aberdeen University. We've developed a continuing personal development course entitled An Introduction to Hydrogen for the Public Sector. The course, launched in July 2024, is targeted at local planning professionals and is developed. The modules have been developed for this course are free to access via the Improvement Service website. A planning hub for Scotland was established in September 2024, hosted by the Improvement Service, and its initial focus is to improve consenting speed for hydrogen developments. The hub is working to identify the pipeline for hydrogen projects and gain an understanding of the operational barriers to their delivery. Comprehensive planning and consenting guidance for the development of hydrogen production facilities will be published this year. By developing our domestic hydrogen sector, Scotland, in partnership with the UK Government and our European neighbours, can play a key role in meeting the growing global demand for low-carbon and renewable hydrogen technologies and skills that will be required in the energy system of the future. As Audrey Nicholl, Kevin Stewart and others pointed out, this situation, obviously, or the wider situation, would be assisted greatly if the UK Government could come to the right decision on Acorn. But we have been taking steps to work out a way forward, a reality, by forming international agreements, building relationships and collaborating on research. Scotland has very strong international relationships, most notably with the EU and individual member states such as Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium. I have seen for myself the strong interest that exists in those countries in Scotland's hydrogen capacity. As Maurice Golden and others, I will do, yes.
Brian Whittle.
Very grateful to the member for giving way. I think he's talking about the international market, and while we pontificate in this chamber and decide what we will or won't do potentially with hydrogen, does he recognise that around the world they're already doing it? And $1.8 billion of exports from the United States, top 15% of their exports. And while we will listen to the Greens saying it's not for transport, while we're having that debate, the Chinese have got over 1 million cars powered by hydrogen. Other countries are just doing it. It's time we caught up.
Minister.
Well, Scotland has a great capacity there, and the Scottish Government is working within the constraints of our devolved powers to forge those relationships, to overcome many of the barriers, and to ensure that we do respond to the fact that, as others have alluded to, the German Government expects to import between 50% and 70% of its hydrogen demand by 2030, to name but one opportunity. As our relationships deepen, we are keen to work with our near northern neighbours, Denmark, Norway and Ireland, as an alliance of producing nations that can supply some of that demand. And also, I can't remember who made the point, but as also to try to meet the demand that exists for hydrogen derivatives, such as ammonia as well. Last year, we welcomed the signing of a joint declaration of intention on hydrogen between the UK and Germany, and this agreement opens the door for deeper collaboration with our key partners in Germany and other hydrogen markets. The first output of that agreement, a UK-German hydrogen trade feasibility study, was published only this week. And the feasibility study includes research findings by the Net Zero Technology Centre's Hydrogen Backbone Link project, co-funded by the Scottish Government, to assess how Scotland could connect to the European hydrogen backbone and facilitate the export of hydrogen produced in Scotland. Presiding Officer, Scotland has, as others have pointed out today, a long and proud history of innovation, and hydrogen is no exception to that. A strong evidence base is crucial to the development of the sector. We are therefore supporting a range of research initiatives to assist us in laying the groundwork to innovate and build on all of that. We have 31 projects funded via our hydrogen and innovation schemes, such as Clyde Hydrogen Systems, novel decoupled electrolysis project based at the University of Glasgow. We have projects such as Gravitricity on geological storage, and those by Intelligent Plant and Green Cat to develop AI-powered decision-making tools. In November 2024, we published the Hydrogen Sector Export Plan, and this ambitious plan, Presiding Officer, by way of conclusion, was developed in consultation with industry and international partners and sets out the steps required for Scotland to realise our hydrogen export potential. Presiding Officer, Scotland has an enormous potential in this area. Hydrogen is not the only answer to Scotland's energy needs, and certainly not, to respond to one or two comments today, is it a magical solution, but it is part of the answer, and it has a potential to benefit us both in terms of our environment and our economy in the years to come.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate on Scotland's hydrogen future. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, and there are 4 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first is that Amendment 17399.1, in the name of Graham Simpson, which seeks to amend Motion 17399 in the name of Gillian Martin on Scotland's hydrogen future, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote, and there'll be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system.